Cloud. We are now recording. Dr. Kujawa Holbrook writes, there are many ways to describe a pilgrimage. The word itself derives from the Latin peregrinus, which means stranger or foreigner. On pilgrimage, the traveler is a foreigner in several ways. Stranger to the companions she meets along the way, a stranger to places visited, a stranger to the inward journey of meaning and transformation. On some level, pilgrimage always connotes a life-changing journey. Some pilgrimage means a journey to a place where holiness is very apparent, or where some kind of divine or human encounter already took place. Some describe it as a search for that or moral significance. Some are on a path toward freedom or peace. Some pilgrims are directed towards destinations, such as the dwelling place of a saint, or a holy place that evokes prayer and reflection, or the site of significant life events. And for others, the passage may be a symbolic journey of their soul toward God. So it's primarily an inward experience of alternative sacred geography. I love that. As we move towards the Holy Land pilgrimage, we will be inviting all of you into some preparation and some pre-formation in what it means to be a pilgrim. It's very different than being a tourist. In the pilgrim, we really will open up our heart to feel how we are changed by seeing what we will see in the Holy Land. Say it's not what you see on your journey, but the new eyes you come home with. It makes the journey really special. So I'm excited to introduce, most of you know Eric Williams, and he is going to share some images and reflections on what this pilgrimage is going to be like. So Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I hope this works. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to walk you through a little bit about what we're going to see. And let's see if I can get this here. All right, 1 second. I'm going to try to share my screen. And let's see. There, can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to walk you through some of the places that we're going to be going and go over some of the things that we're going to be doing. Our trip starts November 14th, 2019. And what are we going to see when we're there? This is a picture of the Sea of Galilee from the town of Capernaum, one of the places that we'll see. When we think about the Holy Land, we think about waves of conquest. The Holy Land, the area that we're going, has been called many names over the years and has been controlled by the Canaanites, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Romans, Greeks, the several waves of Islamic caliphs, the Ottoman Turks, the British, and finally the State of Israel was formed in 1948. And so one of the things that you'll notice when we're there is that there's just layer upon layer of history. The place where we're staying for most of the nights we're in the Holy Land is in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is an absolutely stunning city. Again, you just see all the layers of history. If you can, I don't know if you can see my pointer. Can you see my pointer moving around? This is the Dome of the Rock. This is looking from the Mount of Olives over the old city. Here you see one of the Orthodox churches, and here's the Dome of the Rock, which is from the 600s AD, and is the traditional site where Abraham sacrificed, in the Jewish and Christian traditions, Isaac, or was going to sacrifice Isaac, and in the Muslim tradition, Ishmael. And this absolutely gorgeous mosque was built in the 600s. These are the walls of the city, which date from the 16th century, during the time that Jerusalem was controlled by the Ottoman Turks. Suleiman I was the sultan who ruled over that area in that time. And this is one of the entrances to the old city. We go through this gate very often when we're walking from the Anglican cathedral into the old city. In Jerusalem, of course, we spend time at Herod's temple. What's left of Herod's temple is only this one wall, which is known as the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall, a pilgrimage site for Jews around the world who come, and in fact we did as well, go and in the cracks of the wall, you write prayers, people that you're praying for, and stick them into the cracks in the wall. It's been going on for centuries. And for Jews, this is a holy site because they believe that eventually, when the Messiah comes, the temple will be rebuilt. It's a very contested area because right on top of this Temple Mount is where the Dome of the Rock is, one of the holy sites for Islam. And the mosque that is up there, very close to the Dome of the Rock, is the mosque that Muslims believe was the site where Muhammad went on a midnight journey in the spirit. He was carried by an angel from Mecca to Jerusalem, and that spot became the site of that mosque. And so this one spot in Jerusalem is an incredibly important spot for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and is contested. But it's also a very special and holy place, and we'll go there and pray. You'll see in certain places that we visited, you'll see women with their heads covered. It was required there at the Western or Wailing Wall, and it was something that in some places, out of courtesy, our group was invited to do that. We generally wore long sleeve shirts and pants, especially when we were going into Orthodox churches in the West Bank, just as a sign of courtesy. We were not required to do that, but we did that as a sign of respect. One of the other really neat places that we visit is the plain here, which is the site of Jericho. Now, when we think of Jericho, I think we often think of that great old gospel song, Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho, where Joshua marched around the city 7 times, blowing the trumpets, and the walls came a-tumbling down. What's fascinating to me was to learn going there that there are archaeologists have found 20 different sites that have been Jericho over the centuries. And the oldest one is one of the oldest sites that they've ever found for human habitation. And it dates back 11,000 years to 9,000 BC. And they're doing an archaeological dig on that site now. The Jericho of the Bible is one of the ones they can't quite pinpoint. They're not sure which one that one is, but they have basically sites around that valley that have been communities over the centuries. This picture was taken from a monastery up on the mountain overlooking Jericho, the traditional site where Jesus was tempted by Satan and was shown all the kingdoms of the world. And so there's a monastery there that we can tour, and it just gives you a panoramic view. I didn't realize one of the things that I learned on the pilgrimage that we did in 2016 was sort of how close together everything is. I mean, it's not a huge area that we'll be visiting, and Jericho is actually quite close to the Dead Sea and is one of the lowest spots on earth, and really interesting to go there. Jerusalem is much higher, and I'll show you that in just a second. We also travel from Jerusalem. We spent most of our nights, will be spending most of our nights staying at the Anglican Cathedral in East Jerusalem, taking day trips to various places. But we do spend a couple of nights in Nazareth at a Roman Catholic convent, which with nice food and some really neat excavations. This is the Basilica of Mary, a church that was built on the traditional site of the home of the Virgin Mary. And if you go underground, this cave is where she would have lived. One of the fascinating things that you learn when you go to the Holy Land is the pictures that at least many of us have of the places of the Bible are pictures formed from our own lives and the areas where we live. So if you're from Michigan, you tend to picture the wilderness being a lot of green forested areas, and it's not like that at all. And you tend to picture homes being made of wood. Well, one of the scarce resources in Palestine is timber. There's not a lot of wood. In fact, when Solomon built his temple, he had to import cedar trees from Lebanon to build it. And so that area does not have a lot of wood homes, didn't then, and it doesn't now. And so you see that homes in the first century were very often underground in caves. We saw that in Bethlehem, and we see this in Nazareth as well. Now this is a chapel with an altar, and pilgrims pass by and say prayers as they go visit Mary's home. In Bethlehem, just south of Jerusalem, the famous manger square. I don't know if you can see this over here, but this is a Christmas tree, which is there 12 months a year. I mean, Bethlehem is the place where you celebrate Christmas all year long. We think it's bad here, celebrating for 3 months, but there it's all year long. This is the Church of the Nativity, one of the really cool places that we visit. I'll show you in a second inside that church. But when I talk about the landscape and how it evokes different things in the Bible, to me, this picture, although it's hard to see, it's kind of foreshortened here, but this is a hillside, a terraced hillside, as you might see in Europe, or actually where I grew up in Los Angeles. This is Bethlehem. This is the field that the shepherds would have been tending their sheep. They didn't tend on a flat green meadow. They tended their sheep on terraced hillsides because that was the landscape, very hilly and very rugged. And it was just really wonderful to be able to go there. There are beautiful churches that have been set up all around the Holy Land. Many of these churches were built by a Franciscan priest who was also an architect in the 1800s. And I don't have a picture of it, but there's a beautiful church by Shepherd's Field with wonderful acoustics. And every time we stopped at one of these sites, we would go into one of those churches and sing hymns. So we sang Christmas carols in November 2 years ago. We'll do that again. We sang all kinds of hymns. Wherever we went, we found music and prayers and Bible readings to bring us into the spirit of the place. As Vicki mentioned, one of the things that distinguishes this trip as a pilgrimage, we do have some things that feel like being a tourist, but a lot of our journey was done really as a walk of prayer, walking in the footsteps of Jesus and learning about the people and the landscape of the Holy Land. Inside the Church of the Nativity, we were invited to go for Mass in the very basement, again, where the place would have been. One of the things our tour guide will share with us is that when we think of walking in the footsteps of Jesus or walking in the footsteps of people who lived 2,000 years ago, we have to think about 12 feet lower, because what's happened over the centuries is things have been built up and built up and built up. And so we're walking about 12 feet above where people would have walked in the past. And so to get down to the historical sites, you really have to go down physically to see them. This is the altar in this little chapel underneath the main Church of the Nativity. And you can't really see it, but on the floor is a star. And by tradition, this is the site of the manger where Jesus was born. Now, we don't know. A lot of times I'll say by tradition, because we don't have video evidence of Jesus' life. What we have are stories that were passed down and eventually written down in the Gospels and the epistles. We have oral tradition from people in the area. The Emperor Constantine, when he converted to Christianity in the 300s AD, sent his mother, Saint Helena, to go visit the Holy Land. And so she investigated on his behalf where all of the sites associated with Jesus' life were. And every time she found one where people said, yes, this is the place, she would build a church. So there's a 4th century church usually that was usually a ruin, and then another church was built on top of that, and then another one. And so what we have is a kind of oral and archaeological tradition pointing to these sites. Can I prove that they're definitely the sites? No. But that oral tradition is pretty strong. And these are the steps in leading down to that little chapel from the main floor of the Church of the Nativity. We traveled to the Jordan River, and we will again. Again, the Jordan River I had in my mind was sort of like the Mississippi River. I don't know. I thought of it as being huge. It loomed large in my imagination as a child. But where we went, it was very shallow and narrow. And our tour guide took us to a place that is not on the beaten path. There's a tourist site where most people go. We went to a secluded spot along the river and had it all to ourselves and did the renewal of baptismal vows, in that case with Bishop Gibbs. And that was very special as well. You're allowed to bring home water from the Jordan River. It's better when you bring it home if you purify it before using it. But it's kind of special to be able to use that in baptisms. We also went to the Mount of Beatitudes, the site by tradition where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. And we had a Eucharist at the top. This was one of the places I'll mention where it's very important to be able to walk and to have sturdy shoes. A lot of our time, we didn't walk miles and miles, but there was quite a bit of walking. And on this day in particular, a few of our group in 2016 were not able to manage and had to the bus and ride to the next spot, which was okay. This little grotto is where we demonstrated the natural amphitheater and its ability to amplify sound. So the group was across the street at the bottom of that hill, and I read the Beatitudes from that mountain, and they said they could hear it crystal clear, as if they were 5 feet away. That was pretty stunning. Right near there, just at the bottom of the Mount of Beatitudes, is the Sea of Galilee, which is a sea because of some good promotion. It really is a lake. It was called Lake Gennesaret in the first century. And then over time, because of its association with Jesus' life, it got promoted from lake to sea. And so now it's the Sea of Galilee. But it's really stunning. I mean, it's smaller than the Great Lakes, I'll put it that way. And even some lakes that aren't so great. But it's absolutely stunning to be on that. We went on a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee in a boat that was designed after the models that they had from the first century, what a fishing boat would have looked like back in the day. Obviously, we had motor transportation and they didn't. And here's a guy showing us fishing with a net, tossing it over the side. He did not catch anything, so we did encourage him to try the other side of the boat, but he didn't. So that was a really fun excursion. On the banks of the Sea of Galilee is the city of Capernaum, which is a ruin, but you can tour it, the site of Peter, where Peter lived, where Jesus spent some time, where the fishermen would go out every day in their boats. And we went all through the West Bank. A lot of our trip was spent not in Israel proper, but in the West Bank, which is controlled by Israel, but is also under Palestinian governance as well. And there were all these signs. It was really interesting. A lot of our folks had some concerns about how safe is it? What are we going to be in the area? And the Israeli government will tell you, don't go into the Palestinian areas. They're dangerous. We spent almost all our time in the Palestinian areas and were completely safe the whole time, never felt uncomfortable. One of the churches we went to in a little village in the West Bank called Burkeen is the traditional site where Jesus healed, if you can see this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, guess what? Lepers. The 10 lepers were in this hollowed out cistern away from everybody else, and Jesus called them out and healed them. And of course, the one returned to give thanks. That was a beautiful church, which is this is an iconostasis, an icon screen. Greek Orthodox, some Orthodox denomination in the 9th century, well, in the 900s, the 10th century, had constructed this church. Absolutely stunning. And that's what I meant by the layers of history. In Jerusalem, again, we were at the Mount of Olives, and we traced the Palm Sunday journey from the top of the mountain all the way down. There's some beautiful Orthodox churches. This, I don't know if you can see it, is one of those 19th century churches built by that Franciscan priest, and is called the Church of the Tears because it's where Jesus said to weep over the city of Jerusalem, to the daughters of Jerusalem. Absolutely beautiful. Lacrimae. So there's a road that comes down. We walked that. This down here is the Kidron Valley. Kidron Valley, traditional burial place for Jews, and the place right next to where the Garden of Gethsemane is. In Jerusalem itself is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the traditional site for both the crucifixion and resurrection. This is the site of the crucifixion. They've got a cutout here, and you can place your hand and touch the stone where they believe the cross may have been. Again, hard to pinpoint exactly, but by tradition, all that now is under the roof of this huge Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is called the Episcopal, and it's in the center of the church and is the site of the tomb and the resurrection. This was under construction when we were there, and I urge you, if you have a chance, to look for a National Geographic special that came out, I think, last year or the year before, because they were able to put cameras down there while they were doing the renovation work to see into that tomb and to see what was down there. It hadn't been disturbed for centuries. And in fact, there's a lot of politics around this particular church and also the Church of the Nativity. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is controlled, I think, by 7 different Christian denominations. So everything in Israel is controlled by the Israeli government, but the church itself is under, by ancient tradition, under joint control of these 7 denominations who don't get along very well with each other. And so they've had to develop very strict rules and traditions about who can do what, when, and where. And so they all had to agree and come up with this contract to be able to repair the Episcopal. There's a famous story about a ladder that disappeared one day and caused an international incident because that ladder rested on a floor that was controlled by one denomination and a wall that was controlled by another one. And so no one could ever move or replace that ladder. And then some prankster just made it disappear. And so it eventually reappeared and the crisis was averted. In the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, we went through some of the events of Jesus' life. And one of the neat traditions there is that on the great vigil of Easter, the new fire is kindled down in the Episcopal, down in the tomb, by a priest, and it's then shared with the thousands of people who are waiting in the church for that event. And that flame is then carried all through Christendom. There are actually jets waiting, and so 4 different deacons or priests take a candle with the flame and hop on this jet and go to different continents and share the new fire of Easter from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's also a flame that is kept burning in the church there year-round from Easter to Easter, and a monk who is there 24/7 guarding that flame. And for a donation, you can get some candles, a bundle of candles, and light them from that Easter fire. And so this is the bishop blessing us with that Easter fire, even though, again, it was November. So we celebrated the whole church year in 11 days in November in the different sites that we traveled to. There are also many modern sites that we visited. This is the dividing wall built by Israel around Bethlehem, one of the more poignant places that we visited, a really harsh reality of the existence and the tension between Jews and Palestinians to this day in Palestine and Israel. We saw the Israeli settlements, which are very controversial, which are being expanded daily in Palestinian territory. And we got to walk around and see that, and the artwork and the stories that were shared along this dividing wall. We also visited one of the more significant outreach centers on the Mount of Olives, which is funded by the Kingdom of Jordan and serves people all through the West Bank, children particularly. This is called the Princess Basma Center. And so we made a donation on behalf of the diocese and got a tour of the center, which does all kinds of programs, medical, social, and all kinds of support for children and families. Very inspiring to see that. Just a little bit of the geography here. Modern Israel-Palestine looks like this. So if you look at the green line, which is this border line that goes all the way around, the green line is the state of Israel, essentially, which was expanded in 1967 during the, what's it called? The 7-Day War, I guess it was. Then you have this Palestinian territory, are these yellow spots. You'll also see, so this is basically the West Bank, is this yellow spot here. This larger green area is Israel proper. And then a lot of the news recently that makes people uncomfortable concerns this little area over here, which is called the Gaza Strip, which borders on Egypt to the south here, and is the place where there's been violence and demonstrations and all kinds of problems. I just want to reassure you that we go nowhere near the Gaza Strip on this trip. All of our visiting is done here. And we fly into Tel Aviv over here. We go right to Jerusalem, which is over here. We travel to Bethlehem, to Jericho, to Ramallah. But we're essentially in this area and protected and safe the whole time. We're in tourist-centered sites. You'll see buses all over the place with pilgrims from around the world. And both Israelis and Palestinians have a great deal of interest in keeping tourists and pilgrims safe and happy and spending their pilgrim dollars in these places. And so please know that we are safe the whole time. We also had some relaxing time. This is at the Dead Sea, where you get to go swimming if you want to, and you can try to sink, but it's virtually impossible. And right at the Dead Sea is the lowest bar in the world. So you can have a drink at the lowest bar in the world, as we did. When we went out to the wilderness, there were some actual Bedouins who met us and took us on camel rides. We also had a beautiful Eucharist there in the wilderness right at daybreak. Our guide is Iyad Kumri, who is an honorary canon of the Diocese of Los Angeles. He is from Jerusalem, has lived there all his life, has been a lifelong member of St. George's Anglican Cathedral. He became a tour guide because he was an apprentice of the former dean of the cathedral, Canon Dean John Peterson, who wrote the guide that we use for the Stations of the Cross. Iyad has been leading Episcopal groups for more than 20 years, has done hundreds and hundreds of groups. Here he is with the bishop and me, and he hires different bus drivers, but this is the best one, Omar, the fabulous bus driver who met us at the airport and took us on all of our day trips, navigating ancient roads with tremendous skill and seemingly no fear at all. So Iyad and Omar, I hope will be, I know Iyad will be, but I hope Omar will be our driver. This is St. George's Cathedral, where we spend our nights and have breakfast and dinner every day. We attended worship on Sunday morning at St. George's. We may also attend another church up in Ramallah. I'm not sure what the plan is for worship while we're there, how many Sundays we'll actually be there. I haven't checked the schedule that carefully. And here is our tentative itinerary. On the 14th, we depart. We arrive on Friday the 15th and go to St. George's. On the 16th, we tour Jerusalem and the ancient city of Herodium, one of the palaces that King Herod built. We think of Masada, which is the famous one, but Masada is usually mobbed with tourists, and Iyad likes to go to places that are less busy so we can spend more time and have our own place. So we had Herodium all to ourselves, really a fascinating first century palace. On Sunday, we visit the Western or Wailing Wall, the Dome of the Rock, and then go into West Jerusalem for the Israel Museum, which has the collection of the Dead Sea Scrolls in a beautiful exhibit not to be missed, absolutely fantastic. It also has a scale model of Jerusalem and the temple as it would have been in the first century. On Monday, Jericho and Nazareth. On Tuesday, the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, Capernaum, and the Mount of Beatitudes. On Wednesday, Sepphoris, which is very near Nazareth, but it was, Nazareth was a hick town with about 200 residents. Sepphoris was the big place where Joseph and Jesus probably would have worked as not necessarily carpenters. The word might actually be stonemasons, because stone is what they were working in. But anyway, we'll go into that. But Sepphoris is a really neat visit. And then Caesarea Philippi on the coast. On Thursday, Burkeen, that 10th century Orthodox church I showed you, Nablus, which is where the Jacob's Well, where Jesus met the Samaritan woman, and then Taibe, which is the last Christian town in the West Bank. Christians have fled the Holy Land over the past 30 years. They've been caught in the middle between the tension between Jews and Muslim Palestinians. But Taibe is a town where they still have maintained a Christian presence. A family who had moved to Boston came back and have started a brewery and a hotel in Taibe, and we'll get to meet them. Friday, Bethlehem, Shepherd's Field. Saturday, the Church of the Resurrection in Jerusalem. Sunday, Bethphage, Dominus Flevit, and Gethsemane. That's when we do our Palm Sunday, Holy Week kind of journey. And then on Monday, we do the Stations of the Cross in Jerusalem, and then we have the final Eucharist at Emmaus. One of the three possible sites of Emmaus, the one that Iad thinks is most likely the one that would be mentioned in Luke's Gospel. So, a couple of details. The cost of the trip, excluding airfare, is $2,500. That includes all accommodations, 3 meals a day, the tour bus and driver, all entrance fees, and Iad. It also includes trip insurance, which is not trip replacement insurance. It's really the kind of insurance where if you had a crisis over there, lost your passport, became ill, that insurance would cover getting you home and taking care of any medical or legal fees you had in Israel. We'll also, now I had here a chartered bus to and from the airport in Toronto. I'm still looking at airfare, and that also means that I'm not sure if we'll fly from Detroit or Toronto. 2 years ago, the cost to fly from Toronto was half what it was from Detroit. It was around $1,500 round trip from Detroit. We got our flight about $750 round trip direct from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I'm going to look carefully to see what airfare is. If it's cheaper to go from Toronto, then we'll rent a bus and go to Toronto. If it's cheaper or not much more, we'll fly from Detroit. The rooms at St. George's are doubles, 2 single beds. There is an add-on of $540 if you want one of those rooms just for yourself. Otherwise, we'll double you up. If you don't have someone to go with, we can link you up with someone else in the trip. Let's see. As I said, it's too early to know the cost of airfare, but I'll let you know as soon as I start looking early in 2019. The deposit that's required is $300. We are filling up, I will say. If you go online now and sign up, you will get a message that you're on the waiting list. I'm just waiting to confirm with Iad how many he can actually take. I think we're up to what, 36 or something like that, Vicki?
Yes, that's right.
So I'm hoping he can take 40, which means everybody so far would be in. I'm guessing that over the next several months, a few people will have to drop out. But please know that we will do our best to get you on the trip if you sign up. That $300 is refundable at this point, and I'll let you know when we have to make it non-refundable so that we can make sure that the people who definitely want to go have a spot on the trip. The rest of the payments come pretty late. 1/2 of the total cost is due on August 1st, and the balance is due October 1st of 2019. So that's the time frame for payments. I mentioned before the question of is it safe? Yes. Iad has led, I think that by now, hundreds of groups of Episcopalians and has never had a problem. That's through all the ups and downs, times of tension, greater or lesser. He's a native of Jerusalem and knows how to avoid potential trouble spots. He's also in touch every morning with people in the areas that we're visiting in case there ever was a problem. We would change our itinerary and go to another spot. And I will say in 2016, our group felt totally safe at every moment. We stayed away from the real trouble spots. Even the Dome of the Rock, which is the place that's you're highly watched every second of the time you're there. There was a heavy presence of Israeli soldiers, which frankly I found pretty reassuring while we were there. How strenuous? We do a lot of walking. There's hills, there's uneven ground. Some of the pavement is cracked and broken. I think it's really important to get the most out of the trip that you be in reasonably good shape, able to walk a couple of miles per day. You need good, comfortable, sturdy shoes. We did have a few people that really struggled last time, and while they had a wonderful experience, I know it was tough for them to skip a couple of the activities we did. So just keep that in mind. And maybe, if you're not in great shape now, just spend a little time over the next year doing some extra walking would be a good idea. Can you extend your trip? Yes. You can make your own flight arrangements if you want to. You would just have to get yourself to St. George's Cathedral when we are starting our pilgrimage. So you could go somewhere else. Someone asked about going to Egypt. Yeah, you can go to Egypt and then meet us. But if you want to go with us, we'll need to know that for sure. And if you're not flying with us, I'll need to know that when it comes time to making the airline reservations. Iyad has also, in the past, and we can ask him, has offered a 3-day add-on trip to Jordan to see the ancient ruin of Petra. And you can arrange that with him directly. And that would also change your airline reservation on the way coming home. So we can talk. If you have specific questions about travel arrangements, you can contact me or Vicky after this, or we may have some time at the end of this presentation. So that's my spiel. And I'll get out of this there.
Hi. So let's see, I am not on mute. Thank you, Eric. That was fantastic. I don't know about anyone else, but there were a few times where the screen kind of froze and you kept like talking and
Okay.
stuff, and I was quite anxious in catching up with you. And I'm going to just go ahead and unmute everybody. And so if you want to ask a question, you are free to move about the cabin. Other questions that anybody might have?
Go ahead.
This is Elaine Patrick. I saw that you pay half the balance in August of 2019 and the other half balance. Do you pay for the airfare separate?
So what I'll do is once I have the airfare amount, we'll include that in the total. So you'll get an updated total, hopefully well before August. So
okay, and then will the $2,500 be adjusted if we fly from Detroit?
So the $2,500 will not be adjusted. What would change is the airfare, which is not part of the $2,500. So it could vary quite a bit. It could vary. I think the highest I've seen is around $1,500. So I would say the maximum is going to be $4,000 for the trip.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Paul. When I registered, I signed up for a single room.
Okay.
However, if there's a shortage of singles rooms, I'm opening to sharing with somebody.
Okay.
So if there are other people who actually need single rooms, you can default to them, and I'll adjust.
All right. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. I'll make a note of that.
Any idea regarding the cost involved with Petra, the additional 3 days, ballpark?
I'm trying to remember what it was last time. Hang on, let me look it up and see if I can find it from my old notes here. May take me a minute. You guys all talk, and I'll look it up and see what I can find.
Is Iyad the guide? Is he a Palestinian or is he a?
Yes. So Iyad would describe himself as a Palestinian, an Arab Palestinian Anglican Christian.
Oh, okay.
So in our minds, we tend to think of all Arabs being Muslim, but Palestinians are very proudly Arabs, and also proudly both Christian, some of them, and others Muslim. And one thing I will say is, what was fascinating, one of the things that Iyad did for us was, while we were staying at St. George's, he brought in 3 different speakers to give different perspectives on living in modern Palestine, Israel. So he had a Jewish Israeli speaker, and he had a Christian Palestinian speaker who was a professor, and he had a member of the Fatah government of Palestine, who was a Palestinian Muslim who spoke, and they all gave their different perspectives on what it's like to live in that area today, which I thought was fantastic because they were really different.
Do we know if he's intending on doing that for this pilgrimage?
Yeah. I think his plan is to do that every time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There has been a common question about wardrobe and is it hot there? Is it cold there? And do you want to, are you able to talk about that while you're searching for this other information?
Sure. So one of the reasons I have picked November as the time to go, hard, obviously it lets out families with kids, but November I think is the perfect time weather-wise because it's warm during the day and cool but not cold at night. It's possible to have some rain. It's a very arid climate, so I don't think we had any rain while we were there. Occasionally you will get some rain, but it's really super pleasant weather. I mean, cool enough that you can wear long sleeves and long pants, but in the middle of the afternoon it gets pretty warm. And in the evening, we would sit out with a light jacket in the little courtyard at St. George's, a beautiful garden, and we'd have a beer from the Christian brewery in Taipei and some roasted peanuts and talk over the day. Just super pleasant climate, dry. It reminded me very much of Los Angeles, where I grew up. The same kind of Mediterranean-style climate, dry, air and warm in the day and cool at night.
What is the typical breakfast we would have?
So I will say you're going to have a lot of Middle Eastern food. So breakfast, there might be hard-boiled eggs and hummus and pita bread and yogurt and some cereal and orange juice and coffee. And lunch, wherever we were out on the road, we'd go to different restaurants that Iyad would take us to and have more hummus and chicken and salad. And then dinner back at St. George's would be hummus and pita bread and whatever the meat was. So no hamburgers, no steaks, no American food really the whole time. But I will say it's an incredibly healthy way to eat. Very, all the diets, all the Mediterranean diets are really pushing the kind of food that we'll be eating during those 11 days. We had one person last time who just couldn't stand the food, and it was a tough time for her, but I think the rest of us really liked it.
I love it. Also, do we have to be prepared to tip the guide and the bus driver?
Right. So all the tips that for everywhere else we go are covered in your amount. And then we did ask for a donation at the end of the trip for Iyad and for Omar. That was the only extra tip we asked for. And we do some of the money that you give in the 2,500, we use a little of that to give gifts to the Archbishop of Jerusalem. It was a very gift-giving culture. So we would give money to the Archbishop for his discretionary fund. We gave a donation to the Princess Basma Center. If we go to a church in Nablus or Ramallah, we'll give a donation to the church there. So that was all included in your fee. The only extra, I think, would be a voluntary tip for the tour guide and bus driver.
Okay, it's not so much a day?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm going to have to look up that. I can't find it quickly. I'll have to look up the Petra information later.
Okay.
And I can also ask Iyad if he has updated cost and then share that through the Whitaker website.
Okay. we are going to visit the Dead Sea? 'Cause
Yes.
I didn't see that on the itinerary, but I might have missed it.
I'm almost positive. I'll double check that with Yad. But when we go to Jericho, we usually take a little time and go to the Dead Sea. Last time, I think we had a day where we spent the afternoon at the Dead Sea and then had dinner at Yad. Yad has a house in Jericho, and so we had dinner there with him.
Oh, fantastic.
Is Jerusalem the only place where, out of respect, you're wearing long sleeves? And
No, some of the other churches, like that church in Burkeen, we also wore long sleeves when we went into the church. I think it's interesting. It's definitely still a sexist culture. I'll just put that out there. So it was okay for men to have short sleeve shirts, and women were asked to wear more long sleeves. But yeah, can go over that. Just be prepared. If you're just planning to wear a t-shirt and shorts, it would be okay. As Yad says, you can wear whatever you want to. No one's going to ever talk to you about it. But if you want to show respect for the culture, women were asked to cover their heads. And then most of us, when we went into a church, just wouldn't be wearing longer pants most of the time.
But they do that in Europe too. So
Oh, yeah. In fact, I found it stricter in Europe. When we were there with our kids, they actually wouldn't let you into certain places if you were showing too much skin.
yeah.
I found it more tolerant actually in Palestine.
Super exciting.
Any other questions?
I think somebody was asking about the temperature during the day and at night. How cool is cool? How hot is hot?
Let me look it up just to be sure, because my memory is pretty bad.
Oh, wow.
So it looks like in November, the average high is 67 to 70, average low about 55.
That sounds great.
Yeah, sure does.
Yeah,
better than Michigan, although who knows this year.
Yeah, last year November was warm.
Is it a direct flight from either Detroit or Toronto to Tel Aviv?
So if it's Toronto, yes. If it's Detroit, no. Detroit, we would have to transfer probably in Philadelphia or New York to fly to Tel Aviv.
Okay.
I'm not really aware of any direct flights. I'll look, but I don't remember there being one from Detroit. Who knows? They may have added one.
How many hours is the flight?
12.
12.
Yes, 12 hours. I took a Tylenol PM and tried to knock myself out for the trip.
That's from Toronto, though.
That was Toronto, yeah.
Longer if you flew from Detroit making transfers.
But the bus trip would be, what, 4 hours?
It was around 4, and we had to go through customs, of course, and all get off the bus and go through and then get back on. So we gave ourselves a little extra time because I wanted to be sure we were there early enough to make it through customs and to get everyone processed at the airport.
So I wanted to just add a little bit of practical advice for planning a pilgrimage from this art of Journey to the Sacred, to the Center of the Heart, the pilgrimage book. She writes that start planning well in advance of your estimated departure. And so this is the practical thing. Create an itinerary listing important details, transportation, tickets, visas. This reminds me that you really want to have a passport that is valid for another 6 months after the trip. I think they may even require that by the airport. So making copy of your prescription eyeglasses so that you, in case you drop your glasses, you can get them made again there, that kind of thing. is really preparing the practical details. She writes to do a lot of research. The most effective way to prepare for pilgrimage, who have done the same thing, of course. Find out the nitty-gritty details, do research, look at your Bible maps, study scripture, find out the names of these places. How do you spell them? Third thing she says is to honestly assess your physical stamina and your need for comfort. Many pilgrimage sites are located in areas where rugged travel is necessary. As Eric had mentioned, some of the hikes are a little strenuous. And so you definitely want to have those 10,000 steps a day under your belt when you go. And then also when you begin to start packing, pack well and live simply, only what you can carry by yourself comfortably. And I think it's typical to bring like one wheelie backpack. That's it. So you may wear the same thing for several days, and that's going to be okay. Practicing moderation, so moderating, not only what we eat, but what we drink while you're over there, because it's strenuous and you want to be spiritually awake to what's actually going on. Planning departure rituals. So getting a blessing from your congregation before your trip is a great idea. Asking your congregation to lay hands on you for safety, that they can also participate in this experience that you're about to go on. Saying goodbye to your families and friends, and then you are off. And so while you're away, then taking the time to, I had a friend that used to make address labels so she could easily send postcards back to people that she knew. She just tore them off and away those postcards went. It was very easy to do. Also planning time when you come back for the re-entry. Planning time, setting aside time to reflect on what you experienced, to journal on that, to don't plan to go back to work the very day you land or even the next day. Invite, a day or 2 or 3 of no dinner parties, don't anything but just recover and re-enter the dailiness of the American life. Do you want to add anything else about just sort of preparation?
Is there going to be a need for some sort of converter in order to keep our phones charged?
Yes, the electrical outlets are different over there. That's a really good point.
Yes, and now I can't remember what the actual plugs were, but I can get that to you.
Yeah, I think it's the European style with the round, the 2 round plugs.
2 round plugs. Also, people ask about money. The shekel is the Israeli currency, but everybody takes dollars. And so, in fact, some ATMs you could get dollars or shekels, depending on what you wanted. So bringing dollars is absolutely fine to buy souvenirs. Everyone will take dollars.
That's good to know.
Does that mean not everybody takes credit cards?
A lot of places don't take credit cards. Yeah. The bigger places will. In fact, we go to a big emporium in Bethlehem that has fantastic souvenirs. They will take credit cards. They will ship things back to the States. I bought a creche set for Susan, and they shipped it no problem and took credit cards. Some of the smaller places will go. They will take cash.
Well, if there's no other questions, I just typed in the chat room the prayer of St. Francis, so we can say it together. Does everybody able to see chat? Bless you.
Thank you.
So the prayer attributed to St. Francis, since we just celebrated St. Francis Day, is number 62 in your Book of Common Prayer. It's page 833. Alternatively, you can just read it off the group page there. Let us pray. Lord, make us
Instruments of your peace.
Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness,
Joy.
grant that we may not so much
Seek
to be consoled as console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this meeting, and please be in touch. I wish you well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.